The ancient library smelled of dust, parchment, and secrets that had been buried for far too long. Arya Wintermoon ran her fingers along the spines of leather-bound volumes, her touch gentle and reverent as always. For 3 years she had worked as an archivist in the Repository of Lineages, the last neutral ground in the werewolf territories where knowledge was preserved regardless of pack affiliation or political allegiance. It was quiet work, solitary work, the kind that suited an Omega who had learned early in life that invisibility was often the safest strategy for survival. The other Omegas in the surrounding territories were not so fortunate. They served in pack houses, subject to the whims of alphas who saw them as little more than property, their voices silenced by centuries of tradition that valued strength and dominance above all else. Arya had escaped that fate through sheer luck and the intervention of Master Corvus, the elderly beta scholar who ran the repository and believed that knowledge should be accessible to all, regardless of rank or designation. Tonight, the library was particularly silent. Master Corvus had traveled to the Northern Territories for a conference of scholars, leaving Arya alone with thousands of volumes and the flickering light of oil lamps that cast dancing shadows across the towering shelves. She should have been cataloging the recent acquisitions, but instead, she found herself drawn to the restricted section, the area behind the iron gate that held the most dangerous and forbidden texts. Master Corvus had given her the key years ago, trusting her judgment and her discretion, and Arya had never abused that trust, until tonight. Something had been calling to her for weeks now, a whisper at the edge of her consciousness, a pull she could not explain or ignore. It led her past volumes on ancient pack wars, grimoires of moon magic, and genealogies of bloodlines long extinct, until she stood before a shelf she had somehow never noticed before, despite having walked this same path hundreds of times. The manuscript was bound in silver leather that seemed to glow faintly in the lamplight. There was no title on the spine, no marking to indicate its contents. But when Arya touched it, a shock of recognition ran through her entire body. Her wolf, usually quiet and subdued, stirred with an urgency she had never felt before. With trembling hands, Arya pulled the volume from the shelf and carried it to the nearest reading table. The moment she opened the cover, she knew she had found something that was never meant to be found. The pages were written in Old Tongue, the language of the first werewolves, but Arya had studied it extensively during her years at the repository. The text told a story she had heard only in fragments, in children's tales and drunken songs. The story of the Alpha King who had united all the werewolf clans under a single banner, before the great fragmentation tore everything apart. According to official histories, the Alpha King had been a myth, a propaganda tool used by ancient alphas to consolidate power. But this manuscript told a different story. It claimed that the Alpha King, Kale Nightshade of the Eternal Mountain Pack, had been very real, and that his disappearance 300 years ago had not been voluntary. The text described a betrayal, a conspiracy among the regional alpha councils who feared that a unified werewolf nation would strip them of their individual power and authority. They had used forbidden magic, blood rituals stolen from witch covens, to create a binding curse that would imprison the Alpha King in a pocket dimension, a fortress hidden from the mortal world where he would remain until certain conditions were met. The manuscript included detailed illustrations of the fortress, maps showing its location in the Eternal Mountains, and most intriguingly, a ritual of summoning that could only be activated by someone of pure royal blood. Arya's heart raced as she read the ritual instructions. They were complex, requiring specific moon phases, rare herbs, and the recitation of vows in Old Tongue, but they were not impossible. What caught her attention most was a small notation in the margin, written in a different hand, perhaps added centuries after the original text. It read, "The key lies not in alpha strength, but in omega purity. Only the uncorrupted bloodline can break what corruption has bound." She did not understand what it meant, but something deep inside her, something that went beyond logic or reason, told her that this was important, that she was meant to find this manuscript at this exact moment in time. Without fully understanding why, Arya began to gather the materials listed in the ritual. The repository had an extensive collection of dried herbs and alchemical components, leftovers from when the library had also served as a center for magical study. The moon phase was correct as well. The silver moon, the rarest lunar alignment that occurred only once every 3 years. In the center of the restricted section, Arya cleared a space and began to draw the ritual circle according to the manuscript's precise specifications. She used chalk infused with silver dust, creating intricate geometric patterns that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. The herbs went into a brass bowl at the circle's center: lavender for clarity, wolfsbane for protection, and moonflower for spiritual connection. As midnight approached, Arya felt a mixture of terror and exhilaration. She was probably being incredibly foolish, dabbling in magic she did not fully understand, following instructions from a manuscript that might be nothing more than an elaborate hoax. But the pull she felt was undeniable, and her wolf was practically clawing at her insides, urging her forward with an insistence that bordered on desperation. When the clock tower in the nearby town struck 12, Arya lit the herbs and began to recite the incantation in Old Tongue. The words felt strange on her tongue, ancient and powerful, and as she spoke them, the air in the library began to change. The temperature dropped dramatically, her breath forming clouds of mist in the suddenly frigid air. The chalk circle blazed with silver light, and the flames in the brass bowl turned from orange to pure white. Arya's voice grew stronger, more confident, as the ritual built toward its climax. She spoke the final words, a declaration of intent and a plea for revelation. And then everything went white. The sensation of falling, of being pulled through space and time, overwhelmed her senses. She could not see, could not breathe, could only hold on to consciousness by the thinnest thread, as reality itself seemed to tear apart around her. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. Arya found herself on her hands and knees on cold stone floor, gasping for air, her entire body trembling from the shock of whatever had just happened. Slowly, she raised her head and took in her surroundings. She was no longer in the repository. She was in a vast hall made of black stone, illuminated by torches that burned with the same white flame she had seen in the ritual bowl. The architecture was ancient, predating anything she had ever seen, with soaring arched ceilings covered in carvings of wolves and moons and symbols she could not decipher. At the far end of the hall, seated on a throne of carved obsidian, was a figure that made her heart stop. He was enormous, easily 7 feet tall even seated, with broad shoulders and a presence that filled the entire space with barely contained power. His hair was black as midnight, falling to his shoulders, and his eyes, when they opened to look at her, were the color of molten gold. He was beautiful in a terrifying way, with sharp features that seemed carved from the same stone as his throne. And when he stood, the movement was so fluid and predatory that Arya's instincts screamed at her to run, to submit, to do anything except meet those golden eyes with her own. But she did not run. She had not come this far, had not risked everything, to cower now. The man descended from his throne with deliberate slowness, each step echoing through the silent hall. When he spoke, his voice was deep and rich, with an accent she had never heard before, the accent of old tongue speakers, of a time long past. Who dares to invoke the ancient rites? Who dares to summon the forgotten king? Arya forced herself to stand on shaking legs, brushing dust from her simple archivist's robes. Her voice, when she found it, was steadier than she expected. My name is Arya Wintermoon. I am an archivist from the repository of lineages. I found the manuscript, the one that tells your story. I completed the summoning ritual. The man, because she was now certain this was Cale Nightshade himself, the legendary Alpha King, studied her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He circled her slowly, like a predator assessing prey, and she could feel the weight of his power pressing against her, testing her, trying to determine if she was a threat or an opportunity. An Omega, he said finally, his tone utterly flat. They sent an Omega to mock me, to remind me of how far I have fallen. Arya felt a flash of anger cut through her fear. No one sent me. I came of my own will. I did not even know you were real until I read the manuscript. Kale stopped his circling and stood directly in front of her, close. Enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell the scent of winter storms and ancient forests that clung to him. You should not be here. Little Omega, this place is a prison. And now you are trapped here with me. The ritual you perform does not work in reverse. You cannot leave. The implications of his words hit Arya like a physical blow. She was trapped. She had been so focused on the mystery, on the call that had drawn her here, that she had not considered the consequences. But even as panic threatened to overwhelm her wolf remained strangely calm, almost content, as if being in this place, with this impossibly powerful alpha, was exactly where she was meant to be. If this is a prison, Arya said, forcing herself to meet Kale's gaze, then why am I the first person to find the way in? Why has no one else activated the ritual in 300 years? Kale's expression shifted, surprise flickering across his features before he could mask it. That is an excellent question. The ritual requires pure royal blood. The bloodlines that possess such purity were systematically eliminated by the Alpha Councils after my imprisonment. They could not risk anyone finding me, anyone who might undo what they had done. Arya's mind raced. But I am not of royal blood. I am an Omega from a minor family. No lineage of note. No special heritage. My parents died when I was young, and I have no living relatives. Kyle reached out, and before Arya could flinch, away, he caught her wrist in his large hand. His touch was surprisingly gentle, but she could feel the leashed strength in his grip. He turned her arm, exposing the inside of her wrist where a small birthmark rested. A silver crescent moon she had always assumed was simply a quirk of genetics. His reaction was immediate and visceral. He sucked in a sharp breath, and his eyes blazed brighter, the gold taking on an almost supernatural glow. Impossible, he whispered. The mark of the silver moon, the symbol of House Wintermoon, the royal house that stood beside my own throne. Your family was not minor, little Omega. Your family was second only to mine in power and prestige. And if you bear this mark, if you carry their pure bloodline, then you are the last of a line that was supposed to be extinct. Arya stared at the birthmark, as if seeing it for the first time. She had never given it much thought, had never imagined it meant anything beyond a random pattern of pigmentation. But now, looking at it in the flickering torchlight, she could see that it was too perfect, too precise to be accidental. It was a symbol, a legacy, a truth she had never been told. Why would they hide this from me? Why would my parents never tell me who I really was? Kyle released her wrist and turned away, his shoulders tense. Because knowing would have made you a target. The Alpha Councils fear the royal bloodlines because those bloodlines carry powers they cannot control. Omegas of royal blood are not weak, submissive creatures to be dominated. They are seers, healers, the balance to alpha strength. Together, a royal alpha and a royal omega can create a bond strong enough to reshape reality itself. That is why they hunted your family. That is why they wanted to ensure no one like you could ever exist. The weight of this revelation pressed down on Arya. Everything she thought she knew about herself, about her place in the world, had been a lie. She was not insignificant. She was not powerless. She was the last remnant of a royal house, carrying abilities she had never been taught to use, potential she had never been allowed to explore. And if Kale was right, if the Alpha Councils had committed genocide to prevent someone like her from existing, then her very survival was an act of rebellion against the established order. I do not know how to be what you are describing, Arya said quietly. I do not know how to be anything other than what I have always been. Kale turned back. To her, and for the first time, his expression softened slightly. Then we will learn together, because there is something else you should know. Something the manuscript probably did not tell you. The reason the ritual could only be activated by royal Omega blood is because the curse that binds me can only be broken by my true mate. And you, Arya Wintermoon. Bear the mate mark. She felt it then. The pull she had been experiencing for weeks. The call that had led her to the manuscript and driven her to perform the ritual. It was not just curiosity or fate. It was the mate bond, the mystical connection that werewolves believed tied two souls together across time and space. She looked at Cale, really looked at him, and saw past the intimidating exterior to the loneliness beneath, the pain of 3 centuries of isolation, the weight of betrayal that had never healed. The bond between us, Arya said slowly. Does it mean we have no choice? Are we simply prisoners to destiny? Cale's laugh was bitter. I have been a prisoner for 300 years, little mate. Destiny is just another word for cage. But the bond does not force love or loyalty. It creates potential, possibility. What we do with that is our choice. If you can break my curse, you will be free to leave, free to return to your life. I would not hold you here against your will. But Arya was not sure she wanted to leave. Not anymore. Because if everything Cale had told her was true, then her old life had been built on lies and suppression. The repository had been a refuge, but it had also been a hiding place, a way to avoid confronting who she really was and what she might be capable of. Here, in this impossible fortress with this legendary king, she had the chance to discover her true self, to reclaim a heritage that had been stolen from her family. And perhaps, if she was brave enough, she might also discover what it meant to have a mate, to be connected to someone on a level deeper than anything she had ever imagined. All right, she said, squaring her shoulders. Tell me what I need to do to break the curse. Cale studied her for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether she was serious or simply naive. Finally, he nodded. The curse is complex. It binds me to this fortress, prevents me from leaving or contacting the outside world. But more than that, it feeds on my power, slowly draining me so that eventually I will fade into nothing, becoming truly the legend they wanted me to be. To break it, we need to perform a counter-ritual, one that requires the combined power of a mated alpha and omega of royal blood. But there is a cost. Such magic always demands sacrifice. Arya felt a chill run down her spine. What kind of sacrifice? Cale's expression was grim. I do not know. The specifics reveal themselves during the ritual. It could be memories, years of life, power, or something more fundamental. We will not know until we begin. And once started, the ritual cannot be stopped without destroying us both. The thought of risking her life, of potentially losing something precious she could not even name, terrified Arya. But the alternative was to leave Cale here to slowly fade away, to return to a world where she would always be hiding, always be less than what she was meant to be. That was not a life worth living. Then we will do it, she said firmly. But first, you need to tell me everything. I need to understand what happened 300 years ago, why the Alpha Councils betrayed you, and what kind of world we will be walking into if we succeed. Kyle gestured to the throne room's side chamber, where a fire burned in a massive hearth. Come. This will take time, and you should be comfortable. We may be stuck here together for a while yet. As Arya followed him, she could not help but notice the way he moved, the controlled power in every gesture, the wariness that suggested he expected attack from any quarter. He was a king who had been betrayed by his own people, a leader who had learned that trust was a luxury he could not afford. Over the next hours, Cale told her his story. He spoke of a time when the werewolf territories had been fractured and weak, constantly at war with each other, and vulnerable to external threats from vampire covens and witch circles. He had risen to power through strength and vision, convincing the various Alpha Councils that unity was the only path to survival. For a decade, he had ruled over a confederation of packs, establishing laws that protected the weak and held the strong accountable. He had banned the practice of Omega slavery, established councils where all designations could have their voices heard, and created a system of justice that did not depend solely on might making right. It had been a golden age, brief and fragile, but real nonetheless. But his reforms had threatened too many entrenched interests. alphas who profited from omega exploitation, councils who enjoyed unchecked power, traditionalists who believed that hierarchy based on designation was natural and right. They had formed a secret coalition, working with a dark coven of witches to create the curse that would remove Kale from power without the risk of direct confrontation. On the night of the autumn equinox, during a gathering meant to celebrate the Confederation's 10th anniversary, they had struck. The wine had been poisoned with a potion that weakened his wolf, made him vulnerable to the ritual, his own. Guards, bribed or coerced, had stood aside as the witches chanted their curse. He remembered the moment of realization, the horror of understanding that everyone he had trusted had betrayed him, and then the sensation of being ripped from reality itself. He had awakened in this fortress, alone, with only the knowledge that he would remain here until conditions he could not control were met. For 300 years, he had waited, watching the outside world through scrying pools, seeing his reforms dismantled, his vision perverted, and the Omega population reduced to servitude once more. He had watched generations rise and fall, had seen the Alpha Councils grow corrupt and complacent, and had been powerless to do anything about it. I stopped watching 50 years ago, Kale admitted, his voice rough with emotion. It was too painful, seeing what they had done to everything I built. So I closed the scrying pools and resigned myself to fading away. But then, a few weeks ago, I felt something, a pull, like a thread connecting me to the outside world. I thought I was imagining it, that isolation had finally broken my mind. But it was you. It was the mate bond awakening, calling you to me. Arya absorbed this, trying to imagine the loneliness, the despair of watching the world move on without you, of being forgotten and powerless. No one should have to endure that. The fact that Kale had survived with his sanity intact spoke to a strength that went beyond physical power. When we break the curse, she said, when you return to the world, what will you do? The Alpha Councils are still in power. They will not welcome your return. Kyle's smile was sharp and dangerous. They will not have a choice. I am still the rightful Alpha King, and there are old laws, old oaths, that bind the packs to my authority. But I will not make the same mistakes I made before. I was too idealistic, too trusting. This time I will be strategic. This time, I will ensure that the changes I make cannot be undone. Arya heard the hardness in his voice, the edge of vengeance that 3 centuries of imprisonment had honed to a fine point. She understood it, even sympathized with it, but she also worried. If Kale returned to the world consumed by anger and retribution, he might become the very thing he had once fought against. A tyrant who justified cruelty in the name of justice. You will need allies, she said carefully. You will need people who can help you navigate the modern world, who understand the current political landscape. You will need someone to remind you of why you fought for reform in the first place, not just who you are fighting against. Kale looked at her with those penetrating golden eyes, and for a moment, she thought he might reject her words. But then his expression softened. You are right. I will need a conscience. Someone who can see me clearly and is not afraid to tell me when I am wrong. Will you be that person? Arya Wintermoon, will you stand beside me? Not just as my mate, but as my partner in rebuilding what was lost? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Arya thought about her quiet life at the repository, the safety of obscurity, the comfort of not having to be responsible for anything beyond cataloging books and preserving knowledge. Then she thought about the Omegas still suffering under the current system, about the potential for real change, about the possibility of creating a world where designation did not determine worth. She thought about the pull she felt toward Kale, the sense that despite his power and his pain, he was someone who understood what it meant to fight for something bigger than yourself. And she thought about the heritage that had been hidden from her, the royal blood that ran through her veins, and the abilities she had never been allowed to explore. This was her chance to reclaim all of it, to step into the role she was meant to play, even if it terrified her. I will stand beside you, she said quietly, but I need you to promise me something. Promise me that we will build something better, not just tear down what exists. Promise me that revenge will not consume you, that you will remember the vision you once had of a just and equitable world. Kale crossed the space between them in 2 long strides. He cupped her face in his large hands, his touch gentle despite the calluses earned from centuries of solitary training. "I promise," he said, his voice solemn. "I promise to listen when you speak, to value your counsel, to remember that strength without compassion is just brutality, and I promise that whatever we build together will be worthy of the sacrifices that brought us to this moment." Then he kissed her, and Arya felt the mate bond flare to life with an intensity that stole her breath. It was not just physical attraction, though there was certainly that. It was a merging of souls, a recognition that went beyond words or logic. She felt his loneliness and his determination, his pain and his hope, and she knew that he could feel her fear and her courage, her uncertainty, and her growing conviction that this was exactly where she needed to be. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Kale rested his forehead against hers. "We should prepare for the ritual. It will take time to gather the necessary components and to strengthen our bond so that we can channel the power required." Over the following weeks, Arya learned what it meant to be a royal Omega. Kyle taught her meditation techniques that allowed her to access the dormant powers in her bloodline. She discovered that she had an affinity for healing magic, able to sense injuries and illnesses in others and channel energy to mend them. She found that she could enter a trance state that granted her visions of possible futures, glimpses of paths that might be taken depending on choices made in the present. Most surprisingly, she learned that she could amplify Kale's already formidable power, creating a resonance between their energies that made them stronger together than either could be alone. Kale, in turn, opened himself to her in ways he had not done with anyone in centuries. He showed her the fortress, the vast complex that existed outside normal space, with training grounds and libraries and gardens that bloomed with impossible flowers. He shared his memories through their bond, letting her see the world as it had been 300 years ago. The beauty and, the corruption, the hope, and the betrayal. They trained together, Arya learning combat techniques that would allow her to defend herself despite her Omega designation. Kale relearning how to trust another person with his vulnerabilities. And slowly, carefully, they fell in love. It was not the instant, consuming passion of storybooks, though the mate bond certainly provided that foundation. It was a love built on mutual respect, on shared goals, on the recognition that they were better together than apart. Arya loved Kale's intelligence, the way his mind worked through complex problems, the rare moments when his stern facade cracked to reveal dry humor or unexpected gentleness. She loved that he treated her as an equal, never condescending to her despite the vast difference in their power levels, always listening when she challenged his assumptions or offered alternative perspectives. Kyle loved Arya's courage, the way she had walked into the unknown without hesitation, the quiet strength that allowed her to stand up to him when necessary. He loved her compassion, her ability to see the potential for good even in difficult situations, her refusal to let fear or pain turn her bitter. Finally, after 6 weeks of preparation, they were ready. The ritual would take place during the next silver moon, using a complex series of invocations and energy transfers that would either break the curse or destroy them both in the attempt. The night before the ritual, Arya and Kyle sat together in the fortress gardens, watching impossible stars wheel overhead in this pocket-dimension sky. "Are you afraid?" Kale asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Yes," Arya admitted, "but I am also excited. Whatever happens tomorrow, we tried. We fought for something worth fighting for." Kyle pulled her closer. "I need to tell you something. The sacrifice the ritual requires. I have been researching, and I believe I know what it will demand." Arya's heart clenched. "What?" "My immortality. As the Alpha King, I was blessed by the moon goddess with eternal life, the ability to rule for as long as I was needed. The curse has been feeding on that immortality, draining it slowly. The ritual will consume what remains, leaving me with a normal werewolf lifespan. perhaps a century or two if I am fortunate. Arya processed this, understanding the implications. You will be mortal, vulnerable. Eventually, you will die. Kyle nodded. Yes, but I will also be free. And a century or two with you, building the world we envision, is worth more than an eternity alone in this prison. Tears pricked Arya's eyes. She had not expected this, had not allowed herself to imagine a future with Kale that extended beyond breaking the curse and returning to the world. But now, hearing him speak of a lifetime together, she realized how much she wanted exactly that. Then we will make every moment count, she whispered. We will build something so beautiful, so lasting, that it will endure long after we are gone. The next night, under the light of the silver moon, they began the ritual. The fortress's central chamber had been prepared according to ancient specifications, with circles of power drawn in silver and gold, candles infused with sacred oils, and offerings to the moon goddess who was said to watch over all werewolves. Arya and Kyle stood at the center of the largest circle, hands clasped, their energies already beginning to resonate and amplify. Kyle began the invocation in Old Tongue, his voice strong and clear, calling upon the ancient powers to witness their intent and grant their petition. Arya responded with the Omega's part of the ritual, her voice weaving through his, creating a harmony that seemed to make the very air vibrate with power. She felt her abilities activating, her healing magic flowing through the bond into Kale, mending old wounds both physical and spiritual. Her visions showed her glimpses of their possible futures, paths of triumph and tragedy, success and failure, all branching from this single moment. The power built between them, a crescendo of energy that blazed brighter and brighter until the entire chamber was filled with silver and gold light. Arya felt the moment when the curse began to break, the dark magic that had bound Kale for 3 centuries starting to fracture under the assault of their combined will. But the curse fought back. It lashed out with tendrils of shadow, trying to drain their power, to pull them into the same prison that had held Kyle. Arya gasped as pain seared through her, the curse recognizing her as the greater threat, the one who had made this ritual possible. It tried to tear her away from Kyle, to break the bond between them. Kyle roared, his alpha power surging to protect his mate. He pulled Arya closer, wrapping his arms around her, his energy forming a shield that deflected the curse's attacks. But she could feel the cost, could sense his immortality burning away like paper in flame, consumed to fuel the magic that would set them free. The ritual reached its climax, a moment of perfect balance where everything hung on the edge of success or catastrophic failure. Arya made a choice. She poured everything she had into the bond, every bit of her power, her hope, her love. She reached deep into her royal bloodline and activated abilities she had not known existed, channeling the accumulated power of generations of House Wintermoon through herself and into Kale. The curse shattered. The I sound was like breaking glass amplified 1,000 times, a crystalline explosion that echoed through dimensions. The shadows dissipated, the binding fell away, and Kale collapsed to his knees, free at last, but drained beyond anything Arya had ever seen. She fell with him, her own energy depleted, barely conscious. They knelt together in the center of the ritual circle, holding each other up, both of them trembling from exertion and shock. The fortress around them began to change. The pocket dimension was collapsing, its purpose fulfilled, and they needed to leave before it dissolved completely. Kyle, with the last reserves of his strength, activated a portal, a gateway that would take them back to the mortal world. As they stumbled through, Arya caught a last glimpse of the throne room, the prison that had held Kale for 300 years, before it faded into nothingness, becoming truly the legend it had always been to the outside world. They emerged in the eternal mountains, in a clearing surrounded by ancient pine trees, under a night sky filled with real stars. Arya breathed in air that smelled of snow and earth and living things, and felt tears of relief stream down her face. They had done it. They had broken the curse. Kale wrapped his arms around her, and she could feel that he was crying too. 3 centuries of pain and loneliness finally releasing in great, shuddering sobs. They stayed like that for a long time, simply holding each other, letting the reality of their freedom sink in. Finally, Kyle spoke, his voice hoarse. "We need to get to safety. The Alpha Councils will sense my return. They will send hunters." Arya nodded, though she could barely stand. "Where do we go?" Kyle's smile was fierce. "To the one place they cannot easily reach. To the Sanctuary of the Moon, the sacred temple where werewolf law forbids violence. We will gather allies there, and we will plan our next move." The journey to the sanctuary took 3 days. Kale and Arya traveled, mostly at night, avoiding settlements and staying off established roads. Despite his depleted immortality, Kale was still formidably strong and fast, though Arya could sense that he was adjusting to his new mortality, learning the limits of a body that could now be injured and killed. She used her healing abilities to keep them both functioning, mending the minor injuries they sustained from rough travel, and providing energy when exhaustion threatened to overcome them. Along the way, they encountered other werewolves, some of whom recognized Kale from old paintings and tapestries, their eyes widening in shock at seeing a legend made flesh. Word would spread, Arya knew. The councils would soon know exactly where they were headed, but that was part of the plan. The sanctuary was not just a refuge, it was also a symbol, a place where the old laws still held power, and where Kale could make his return known to all werewolves simultaneously. They arrived at the sanctuary on the morning of the 4th day. The temple was built into the side of a mountain, its entrance marked by massive pillars carved with lunar symbols and the names of every Alpha King who had ever ruled. Kale's name was there, the last on the list, followed by 3 centuries of blank stone. The temple guardians, elderly werewolves who had dedicated their lives to maintaining the sacred space, recognized Kale immediately. They fell to their knees, tears streaming down their weathered faces, and welcomed him home in old tongue. The high priestess, a woman named Selene, who claimed to be over 200 years old, embraced Kale like a lost son. "I knew you would return," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I knew the moon goddess would not abandon us forever." Kyle introduced Arya, explaining her heritage and the role she had played in breaking the curse. Selene studied Arya with keen eyes, then smiled. "House Wintermoon lives. The balance returns. You are welcome here, child. You are welcome in the home your ancestors helped to build." Over the next weeks, the sanctuary became the center of a gathering storm. Werewolves from across the territories began to arrive, drawn by rumors of the Alpha King's return. Some came out of curiosity, others out of loyalty to old oaths, and still others because they were desperate for change in a system that had failed them. Arya watched as Kale transformed from the isolated, wary man she had first met into the leader he had once been. He listened to every petitioner, heard stories of injustice and suffering under the current Alpha Councils, and carefully built a coalition of those willing to fight for reform. He was strategic, reaching out to Alphas who had grown disgusted with the corruption of their peers, to Betas who saw opportunity in a new order, and especially to Omegas who had the most to gain from the return of Kale's vision. Arya served as his advisor and partner, using her visions to anticipate threats and opportunities, her healing magic to tend to the injured, and her growing political acumen to navigate the complex web of alliances and rivalries. But they both knew that the Alpha Councils would not allow this gathering to continue unchallenged. The confrontation came on the night of the autumn equinox, exactly 300 years after the curse had been cast. A delegation from the 5 major Alpha Councils arrived at the sanctuary, led by Alpha Magnus Bloodfang, the most powerful council member and a direct descendant of one of the conspirators who had imprisoned Kyle. They demanded an audience, invoking the ancient laws that guaranteed safe passage within the sanctuary. Kyle agreed to meet them in the temple's great hall, with Arya at his side and witnesses from every pack present. The hall was packed with hundreds of werewolves, the tension thick enough to taste. Alpha Magnus stood before Kale's seat, his expression a mixture of anger and barely concealed fear. "You have no right to claim leadership he said, his voice carrying through the hall. "You are a relic of a dead age. The world has moved on. We have built a stable system, and we will not allow you to tear it down based on archaic laws and sentimental nostalgia." Kale did not rise from his seat. His response, when it came, was calm and measured. "You have built a system that enriches alphas at the expense of omegas and betas. You have created a hierarchy based solely on designation, ignoring merit, wisdom, and justice. You have perverted everything I fought to create, and you call that stability. I call it tyranny." Alpha Magnus sneered. "And what would you replace it with? More naive idealism? More restrictions on alpha rights? You tried that before, and it failed. That is why we removed you." Kale's eyes flashed gold. "You did not remove me through honorable challenge or democratic process. You cursed me with dark magic, committing a crime against the moon goddess herself. You broke every law you claim to uphold. And now you stand here and lecture me about rights?" Arya felt the mood in the hall shift. Many of those present had not known the full details of Kale's imprisonment. The revelation that the Alpha Councils had used forbidden magic, had allied with witches to commit what amounted to assassination, shocked even some of the Alphas in attendance. Alpha Magnus realized his mistake too late. He tried to regain control of the narrative, but Selene, the High Priestess, stepped forward. As guardian of the sanctuary and speaker for the moon goddess, "I declare that the Alpha Councils acted in violation of sacred law. The curse they cast was an abomination, a crime that demands judgment. Kale Nightshade is the rightful Alpha King, and any who oppose his return do so in defiance of divine will." A murmur ran through the assembled werewolves. The pronouncement from Selene carried immense weight. Challenging her was challenging the moon goddess herself, something few werewolves would dare. "Alpha." Magnus tried one last desperate gambit, then let the moon goddess decide. "I challenge Kale Nightshade to single combat. If he is truly meant to rule, let him prove it by defeating me." The hall fell silent. Everyone knew this was a trap. Kale had sacrificed his immortality to break the curse. He was mortal now, vulnerable in a way he had not been for centuries. Alpha Magnus was in his prime, a powerful fighter with centuries of his own experience. Arya grabbed Kale's arm. "You do not have to accept. This is a rigged fight. We can find another way." But Kyle shook his head. "If I refuse, I look weak. And I need to establish, once and for all, that I am still capable of leading. Do not worry, my love. I have not survived 300 years of imprisonment to fall to this posturing fool." He stood and addressed the hall. "I accept your challenge, Alpha Magnus. We will fight under the traditional rules, to submission or death, witnessed by all present. Let the moon goddess judge who is worthy to lead." The fight took place in the sanctuary's outdoor arena, a circular space surrounded by tiered seating carved into the mountain. Hundreds of werewolves packed the stands, watching as Kale and Alpha Magnus faced each other under the light of the full moon. Arya stood at the front, her heart pounding, her hands clenched so tight, her nails drew blood from her palms. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more supernatural romance content, please hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what kind of stories you would like to see next. Your support means everything and helps me continue creating these narratives for you. The fight began with both combatants in human form, circling each other, looking for openings. Alpha Magnus struck first, a blur of speed and power that would have decapitated a lesser opponent. But Kale had not spent 3 centuries idle. He had trained endlessly in his prison, perfecting techniques, honing his skills to a razor's edge. He dodged, his movements economical and precise, and countered with a strike that sent Alpha Magnus staggering back. They traded blows, the sound of impact echoing through the arena like thunder. Alpha Magnus shifted into his wolf form, a massive beast with fur the color of dried blood and eyes full of rage. Kyle followed suit, his own wolf emerging in a ripple of power, black as midnight, with those same golden eyes that seemed to glow with their own inner light. The wolves clashed, teeth and claws, tearing at flesh, both of them fighting with the desperation of those who knew that defeat meant more than personal failure. For Alpha Magnus, It meant the end of the system that had kept him in power and wealth. For Kale, it meant the death of hope, the validation of those who had betrayed him, and the loss of everything he and Arya had fought to achieve. Arya watched, her breath caught in her throat, unable to look away despite the violence. She could feel Kale through their bond, could sense his pain as Alpha Magnus's claws raked across his side, drawing blood that stained the arena floor. But she could also feel his determination, his absolute refusal to give up. And then she made a decision. The rules of combat forbade outside interference, but they said nothing about a mate bond. Arya closed her eyes and opened herself to the bond completely, channeling her energy to Kale, her healing magic working to mend his injuries even as they were inflicted, her power amplifying his own. It was exactly what they had practiced during their time in the fortress, the resonance between Royal Alpha and Royal Omega that made them stronger together. Kale felt the surge of power, and his fighting changed. He became faster, stronger, his movements flowing with a grace that seemed almost supernatural. Alpha Magnus sensed the shift and redoubled his efforts, fighting with increasing desperation as he realized he was losing. The end came suddenly. Kale feinted left, then struck right, his jaws closing around Alpha Magnus's throat. He did not kill, though he could have. Instead, he held the position, applying just enough pressure to make it clear that Alpha Magnus's life was in his hands. "Submit," Kale growled, his wolf's voice carrying to every corner of the arena. "Or die. Your choice." For a long moment, Alpha Magnus struggled, his pride warring with his survival instinct. Then, finally, he went limp, exposing his throat fully in the ultimate gesture of submission. "I yield," he whispered. Kale released him and shifted back to human form, standing over the defeated Alpha. "Let it be known," he said, his voice carrying to all assembled, "that I offer mercy even to those who showed me none. Alpha Magnus will live, but his authority is forfeit. The Alpha Councils as they currently exist are dissolved. We will build a new system of governance, one based on justice and representation for all designations." The crowd erupted. Some cheered, others protested, but the majority seemed cautiously hopeful. Change was coming, whether they were ready for it or not. Over the following months, Kale and Arya worked tirelessly to build the new order. They established a parliament of packs, with representatives from Alphas, Betas, and Omegas, all having equal voice. They outlawed Omega slavery and designation-based discrimination, creating strict penalties for violations. They set up schools where young werewolves of all designations could learn to use their abilities, regardless of their social status. They reformed the justice system, creating courts that operated on evidence and law, rather than might making right. It was exhausting, frustrating work. They faced resistance at every turn, from traditionalists who saw any change as weakness, from opportunists who tried to manipulate the new system for personal gain, from those who simply could not imagine a world different from the one they had always known. But they also found allies, werewolves who had been waiting for this chance, who threw themselves into the work of reform with passion and dedication. Arya discovered that she had a gift for diplomacy, for finding common ground between opposing factions, for crafting compromises that satisfied enough parties to keep moving forward. Her visions helped them anticipate problems before they became crises, and her healing magic became legendary as she traveled to different territories, tending to the sick and injured regardless of their pack, affiliation, or social status. Kyle, meanwhile, proved that he could be both firm and fair, willing to use force when necessary, but always preferring negotiation and consensus. His legend grew, stories spreading of the Alpha King who had returned from the dead to save his people, who fought alongside his Omega Queen to create a better world. They formalized their bond in a ceremony that brought together werewolves from every territory, a celebration that lasted for 3 days and nights. Arya wore a gown of silver silk, and Kale stood beside her in traditional royal regalia, and when Selene bound their hands and declared them eternally mated, the assembled crowd howled their approval loud enough to shake the mountains. That night, in the privacy of their chambers, Kale held Arya close and whispered his gratitude. I would have faded away in that prison if not for you. You gave me back my life, my purpose, my hope. Everything we have built, everything we will build, exists because you were brave enough to walk through that door. Arya kissed him softly. We saved each other. You gave me a heritage I did not know I had, a purpose bigger than myself, and a love I never thought I would find. We are better together than we ever could have been apart. And they were. As the years passed, their bond only grew stronger, their partnership more seamless. Together, they guided the werewolf territories through the difficult transition to a more equitable society, weathering challenges and celebrating victories. Arya gave birth to twins, a son and a daughter, both carrying the combined bloodlines of House Nightshade and House Wintermoon. The children represented the future they were building, a generation that would grow up knowing that designation did not determine destiny, that strength came in many forms, and that justice was not just an ideal, but an achievable reality. Chaol, now mortal but no less powerful in spirit, took joy in teaching his children, watching them grow and develop abilities that blended alpha strength with omega wisdom. He never regretted the sacrifice of his immortality, for the life he lived now, surrounded by family and purpose, was worth more than an eternity alone. Arya continued to explore the depths of her abilities, discovering new applications for her healing magic and visions. She established a network of Omega healers and seers, creating a tradition that would ensure the knowledge of royal Omega powers was never lost again. She wrote extensively about her experiences, leaving behind texts that would guide future generations. 20 years after the curse had been broken, Chaol and Arya stood together on a balcony overlooking the new capital, the city they had built as a symbol of the unified werewolf nation. It was evening, and the lights were beginning to come on, thousands of them, each representing a family, a life, a story. Do you ever regret it? Chaol asked, his arm around Arya's waist. Leaving your quiet life at the repository for all this chaos and responsibility? Arya laughed, leaning into his embrace. Not for a single moment. I thought I was hiding in that library, protecting myself from the world, but I was really just waiting for the moment when I would be called to something greater. You gave me that. We gave each other that. Chaol kissed the top of her head. The work is not finished. There is still so much to do, so much to change. I know, Arya agreed, but we have a foundation now. We have proof that change is possible, that a better world can be built. Whatever challenges come next, we will face them together, just as we always have. They stood there as the sun set and the stars emerged, two souls bound by destiny and choice, by love and shared purpose. The Alpha King had been a whisper in legends, a story told to children, a myth that most believed was only that. But Arya had knocked on his door, had found him in the darkness, and together they had brought him back into the light. And in doing so, they had changed the world, proving that sometimes legends are real, and that the greatest power lies not in strength alone, but in the courage to stand together, to fight for justice, and to never stop believing that a better future is possible. The future stretched before them, full of challenges and opportunities, and they would meet it as they had met everything else, with determination, with compassion, and with the unshakable knowledge that together they could accomplish anything. If this story resonated with you, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of Arya and Chaol's journey? What other supernatural romance stories would you like to see? And do not forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more content. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey, and I will see you in the next story.